St. Petersburg. Winter. The year is 1864, but it could just as easily be tonight. The Neva River has frozen into a sheet of iron grey glass, and bitter wind crawls along narrow alleys, threading through cracked windows and beneath swollen doors. Snow falls without sound onto cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, merchants, beggars, bureaucrats, all moving through the cold, with their collars raised and eyes cast downward. Gas lamps flicker weakly against the pervasive yellow fog, casting amber pools of light that barely penetrate the darkness, gathering like a heavy blanket over the city. Inside a cramped apartment on the fourth floor of a crumbling building, there is almost no light. A single candle burns on a crooked wooden table, its flame shivering with every draught, throwing long, distorted shadows against damp, peeling walls. The air is stale, slightly sour, as if it has been breathed too many times by the same solitary lungs. Here, beneath the noise of the world above, the city's chaos is muffled, as though the streets were only a vague, oppressive dream. At a desk scarred with ink and time, a man writes. He is not a hero, not a saint, not an inspirational figure. He is bitter, spiteful, wounded, and painfully, almost unbearably self-aware. He writes because he cannot sleep. He writes because the silence is unbearable. He writes because, somewhere in the labyrinth of his own consciousness, he believes there might be understanding, if not peace. You know this man, though you have never met him. You know the weight of his solitude, the exhausting circular arguments he conducts with himself at 3 a.m, the way he dissects every conversation, finding evidence of inadequacy in every pause, every glance. Your bedroom at 2 am becomes its own underground, a place where social anxiety and regret echo off the walls, where you lie turning over every memory, every awkward conversation, every silent disappointment. Tonight, you and I will descend into that underground place together, not to suffer, but to understand. Not to glorify the chaos inside you, but to gently hold it in the dim, flickering light of Dostoevsky's wisdom, until even your restless thoughts grow tired and finally, mercifully, fall asleep. Picture yourself standing on a narrow cobblestone street in St. Petersburg, winter 1864. The Neva River has frozen into a sheet of iron grey glass, and bitter wind crawls through narrow alleys, threading beneath doors and through cracked window frames. Snow falls without sound onto stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, merchants, bureaucrats, dreamers, all moving through the cold with collars raised and eyes cast downward. Gas lamps flicker weakly against the pervasive yellow fog, casting amber pools of light that barely penetrate the darkness, gathering like a heavy blanket over the most abstract and intentional city in the world. This metropolis, built on a swamp, rises from mist like a fever dream of stone and iron. Somewhere in this labyrinth lives our underground man in a cramped apartment on the fourth floor of a building that leans slightly, as if exhausted by the weight of all the lives it contains. His rooms are small, poorly heated, with walls that weep moisture and furniture scarred by time. The ceiling presses low enough to oppress a tall man. This is not mere poverty, it is something more deliberate, more chosen. This is the physical manifestation of withdrawal, the architectural expression of a soul that has turned inward and locked the door behind itself. Dostoevsky calls it a corner, but it is more than geography, it is a symptom of consciousness itself. You know this place intimately, though you have never been to Russia, though you were not alive in 1864. You know it because you inhabit your own underground. Consider how your bedroom transforms at night. By day, it is ordinary, but as darkness falls, it becomes an island, a small enclosed universe where you are both prisoner and philosopher. The ceiling becomes a blank sky. Shadows lengthen along walls like unspoken memories. Your phone glows with cold, artificial light. A small moon of notifications and comparisons. You scroll through curated lives, observing existence through screens rather than participating in it. When you finally set the device aside, face down, the darkness grows thicker and your own underground takes form, not a physical basement, but a concealed chamber beneath your waking life. This geography of isolation is drawn not only by bricks and doors, but by invisible thresholds. During the day, you cross threshold after threshold, into offices, shops, crowded rooms where you adjust your face, your voice, your posture to match what is expected. The world demands smiles when you feel nothing, rapid answers when you need time to think, participation in the great noisy theatre of society. But at night, a more intimate boundary emerges, the border between the self you present to others and the raw, unedited self that watches from within. At first, this descent feels like mercy. When the door clicks shut, when the room grows quiet, something in you loosens. You are released from the exhausting obligation to be fine, productive, pleasant. No one is waiting for you to reply. No one is measuring your performance. The underground man chose his mousehole not from weakness, but from a desperate need for preservation. You, too, have retreated underground, not because you are broken, but because you are painfully, exhaustingly aware. Here, in the geography of isolation, the theatre is closed. The mask falls away. This is not emptiness, but fertile soil, where consciousness can finally rest without performing. Your isolation tonight is not a sign of failure, it is the natural habitat of a deeply thinking being who needs sanctuary from the noise above. Let the walls hold you, let the darkness cover you like heavy velvet. In this underground space, you are sovereign, safe from judgment, free to simply exist as a breathing, thinking soul until even your restless awareness grows tired and gently dissolves into sleep. Before we descend deeper into the philosophy of the underground, you must meet its architect not as a distant literary monument gathering dust in academic halls, but as a trembling, breathing human being whose wisdom was carved from his own flesh and terror. Fyodor Dostoevsky was not a comfortable philosopher observing life from safety. He was a wounded prophet who understood suffering as intimate companion, who knew insomnia not as occasional visitor but as lifelong cellmate. When he wrote Notes from Underground in 1864, every word was stained with his own blood. Every sentence born from nights when sleep fled like a frightened animal and left him alone with his thoughts. Transport yourself to Semenovsky Square, St. Petersburg, December 22, 1849. The air burns with cold so fierce it seems to crack. Dostoevsky stands with other condemned men, 28 years old, convicted of reading forbidden books and discussing dangerous ideas, condemned essentially for thinking. They are stripped to white shirts, shivering violently as priests hold crosses to their blue lips. 3 men are tied to stakes. Soldiers raise their rifles. In those final moments, Dostoevsky calculates that he has perhaps 5 minutes left of existence. 5 minutes before consciousness dissolves into absolute nothingness. You know this terror, though you have never faced a firing squad. You know it at 3, and when anxiety sits on your chest like a stone, when the future looms dark and uncertain, when every worry compounds until breathing becomes difficult. That crushing sense of impending doom that visits you in sleepless hours is the faint echo of what Dostoevsky felt staring down rifle barrels, watching his life contract to a single terrible point. But the shots never came. At the final second, a messenger arrived with the Tsar's pardon. The execution was theatre designed to shatter minds. One prisoner went permanently insane. Dostoevsky survived, but something fundamental broke and reformed inside him. He was sentenced instead to 4 years of hard labor in an Omsk prison camp, shackled in irons that were never removed, sleeping on wooden planks among murderers and thieves. It was there, in what he later called the House of the Dead, that his understanding of suffering deepened beyond mere intellectual concept into lived knowledge. His epilepsy developed during these years, seizures preceded by moments of transcendent clarity, brief glimpses of cosmic harmony, followed immediately by convulsions and darkness. He learned to live in cycles of illumination and despair, ecstasy and collapse. The underground man was being born in those frozen barracks, formed from the recognition that for some souls, suffering is not an obstacle to life, but its very substance. When he finally wrote Notes from Underground, his personal circumstances mirrored his character's anguish. His wife lay dying in the next room. Gambling debts crushed him. He would sit at roulette tables for days, losing everything, pawning his clothes, writing desperate letters, begging for money. The manuscript pages were literally ink stained with tears and bile, created in fever dreams of financial panic and creative desperation. Each word was wrung from a consciousness that had touched the abyss and returned forever changed. Why do I tell you this as you lie there in your own darkness? To offer profound validation. Your anxiety, your sleeplessness, your sense of being fundamentally different from those who seem to navigate life easily, these are not defects, but marks of a deep, complex soul. Dostoevsky, one of humanity's greatest minds, felt them too. Your restless consciousness places you in company with a master who survived the underground and transformed it into art that still speaks across centuries. Let his struggles sanctify yours. In recognizing this kinship, find permission to finally rest. Now emerges the voice that will guide us through these dark corridors, not a hero's voice, not a sage's measured wisdom, but something far more unsettling and familiar. The underground man introduces himself with brutal honesty. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. Yet even as these words drip with self-condemnation, you can hear something else beneath them, a strange, twisted pride, as if his very wretchedness were a badge of authenticity in a world of comfortable lies. He calls himself a mouse, not from humility, but from acute self-awareness. This small grey creature, scurrying through the wainscoting of existence, has chosen his identity deliberately, almost defiantly. You recognize this mouse immediately, don't you? You have felt its nervous energy coursing through your veins at 2 a.m., when your mind refuses the mercy of sleep. Dostoevsky draws a sharp, unforgiving line between his narrator and what he calls the men of action. Those blessed souls who move through life with enviable simplicity. When they encounter an obstacle, they simply stop. When they desire something, they reach for it without endless internal deliberation. When someone insults them at noon, they have forgotten it by evening. They possess a protective layer of beautiful stupidity that allows them to sleep soundly, untroubled by the infinite complexities of human motivation. But you are different. You are the conscious mouse, cursed with the terrible gift of seeing every side of every situation until certainty dissolves into paralyzing perspective. When someone speaks to you dismissively, perhaps a co-worker's casual slight, a friend's delayed response to your message, you do not react immediately like those fortunate men of action. Instead, you retreat to your underground corner and begin the mouse's peculiar work. You replay the encounter endlessly, dissecting tone, analyzing subtext, constructing elaborate theories about what their behavior reveals about your fundamental inadequacy. The mouse takes a single grain of social awkwardness and, through the alchemy of overthinking, transforms it into a mountain of humiliation. You know this process intimately. That moment when you stumbled over a word in conversation becomes, by midnight, irrefutable evidence of your social incompetence. That pause before someone responded to your joke expands in memory until it feels like a chasm of rejection. Your consciousness, which serves you so brilliantly during daylight hours, becomes a trap after dark, turning simple human interactions into elaborate indictments against your worthiness. What makes the mouse unbearable to others and to himself is his refusal to simply live. Where others feel and move forward, he feels and then analyzes the feeling, then analyzes his analysis, descending into infinite regression until the original emotion is buried beneath layers of self-awareness. He cannot enjoy a moment without immediately questioning whether his enjoyment is genuine, whether he is feeling what he should feel, whether his response marks him as sophisticated or pretentious. Yet here, in the sanctuary of darkness, let me offer you the mouse's secret consolation. This heightened sensitivity is not a defect, but a form of vision. You see cracks in social facades that others miss entirely. Your retreat into corners is not cowardice, but wisdom. You have learned that the surface world can be harsh to those who feel deeply. The mouse survives by being unnoticed, by wrapping itself in shadows and silence, by creating safe spaces where authenticity is finally possible. Tonight, you are allowed to be small. You are allowed to scurry into your corner without shame or apology. Let your thoughts scatter and dart like a mouse's quick movements, but know that even the most restless creatures eventually tire. Your underground is not a prison, but a refuge where your sensitive soul can finally stop performing and simply rest in its authentic, complicated, beautifully mouse-like nature. Picture your mind as a room without walls, a chamber whose boundaries dissolve the moment you attempt to map them. Every thought branches into three more. Every feeling echoes endlessly, and even in your quietest moments, you hear the relentless machinery of consciousness whirring in the background. This is the landscape where Dostoevsky's underground man dwells, and it is here that he whispers his most disturbing revelation, consciousness itself. When intensified beyond a certain threshold, transforms from blessing into illness, a real, thorough-going disease that corrodes the soul's capacity. For simple peace, the underground man suffers not from mere unhappiness, but from an excess of seeing, an overdose of knowing. Where others move through life cushioned by instinct and habit, he is cursed to watch himself live, like an actor trapped forever on stage while simultaneously sitting in the audience, critiquing every gesture. He understands his cowardice even as he enacts it, recognizes his vanity while displaying it, analyzes his pettiness in the very moment of being petty. This doubled awareness transforms every experience into a bitter dissection before it can be simply felt. You recognize this illness intimately as you lie there in the darkness, don't you? It manifests as your inability to release a single anxious thought once it takes hold. You are not content merely to feel worried. You feel worried about your worry, then ashamed of that worry, then exhausted by the spirals within spirals of your own relentless analysis. Your attempts at self-care become subjects of scrutiny. Am I resting correctly? Why do I still feel this way when I understand it so clearly? Even your healing becomes another performance to judge. This hyper-awareness creates a peculiar paralysis. When faced with simple decisions, you see not two options, but infinite ramifications spiraling outward like fractal patterns. Should you send that text message? Your mind immediately generates 17 ways it could be misinterpreted. Should you attend that social gathering? 17 catastrophic social scenarios bloom in your imagination. So you do nothing, frozen between possibilities, then spend weeks analyzing your inaction, constructing elaborate justifications that only deepen your shame. You know this paralysis in your bones. Perhaps you've spent hours composing a simple email, rewriting sentences, calibrating tone, anticipating every possible interpretation until the task becomes overwhelming. Perhaps you've rehearsed conversations in your head so thoroughly that when they actually occur, your spontaneity has been murdered by preparation. The simplest human interactions become chess games where you're calculating 20 moves ahead while simultaneously judging yourself for needing to calculate at all. What makes this condition particularly cruel is how it masquerades as intelligence. Society celebrates analytical minds, people who think deeply, who see the big picture. But no one mentions the shadow side, that the same consciousness allowing you to understand complexity prevents you from enjoying simplicity. You cannot watch a sunset without questioning whether your appreciation is genuine. You cannot accept kindness without analyzing the giver's motives. An internal spectator never sleeps, never stops watching, never grants you the mercy of unreflective being. Yet tonight, let me offer you a different lens through which to view this affliction. If consciousness is an illness, it is a noble one. Proof that you refuse the comfortable stupidity that allows others to sleep so easily. Your sleeplessness is not malfunction, but evidence of a soul vibrating at frequencies the world cannot always accommodate. You are cursed with empathy so acute it paralyzes certainty. Blessed with vision so clear it reveals life's genuine complexity. Your hyper-awareness is not weakness but tragic wisdom. Tonight, rather than waging war against this sharpened consciousness, simply sit beside it like a patient friend. Let it speak its anxious litanies, then watch as its voice grows quieter, not through force, but through gentle fatigue. Even the most vigilant internal spectator eventually grows tired of watching and allows the curtain of sleep to fall. Picture, for a moment, the feeling of pushing against something that will not move, no matter how desperately you strain. Your muscles ache, your breath shortens, your mind burns with strategies and arguments, yet the obstacle remains serenely indifferent, like a mountain listening to a fly's protests. This is the experience Dostoevsky gathers into a single brutal image, the stone wall. For the underground man, this wall represents every unyielding law of existence, mathematics, nature, mortality, the cold mechanics of cause and effect that govern our universe regardless of our wishes or tears. Listen to how he describes his collision with this immutable reality. Of course I cannot break through the wall by battering my head against it if I really have not the strength to knock it down. But I am not going to be reconciled to it simply because it is a stone wall and I have not the strength. Here lies the essence of his torment, not the wall itself, but his refusal to accept it, his demand that reality conform to his will even when he knows such demands are absurd. The wall manifests most clearly in his rage against arithmetic itself. To the underground man, the simple equation 22:4 becomes a symbol of cosmic tyranny. Why should his consciousness submit to such mechanical certainty? Why should his yearning, thinking, feeling soul be constrained by the indifferent logic of mathematics? He acknowledges the equation's truth, he is not delusional, but he refuses to find peace in it, choosing instead to bloody his forehead against its immovable certainty. The men of action, those blessed souls who sleep soundly, encounter this same wall and feel relief. Ah, they say, here is reality. Here is where my responsibility ends. They accept the boundary instantly, almost gratefully, turning away to live contentedly within its constraints. But you are different. You are cursed with the underground consciousness that sees the wall and feels personally insulted by its existence. You know this wall intimately. It appears wearing different faces, but always with the same immovable solidity. Perhaps it is the relationship that ended and cannot be resurrected. No matter how many times you replay conversations searching for the moment where different words might have changed everything. Perhaps it is the career opportunity that passed. The harsh words spoken in anger that cannot be unspoken. The precious time wasted that cannot be reclaimed. Perhaps it is simply the cruel mathematics of mortality, that days become weeks, become years, and no amount of wishing slows the relentless clock. At 3 a.m, you throw yourself against these walls with the same desperate energy as Dostoevsky's narrator. Your mind constructs elaborate fantasies of revision as if sheer force of regret could crack open time itself and allow you to slip through, to correct, to undo. But the wall remains. The past stays fixed. The consequences continue their inexorable unfolding, indifferent to your protests. What makes this suffering particularly exquisite is your awareness of its futility. You understand that worry cannot change outcomes, that rehearsing old arguments serves no practical purpose. Yet this knowledge changes nothing. Your consciousness allows you to see clearly that you are trapped in pointless suffering while being unable to stop suffering pointlessly. Tonight, however, I invite you to approach the wall differently. There is a profound difference between acceptance and defeat. To stop throwing yourself against immovable reality is not surrender. It is wisdom born from exhaustion. The wall will stand whether you rage or rest. Instead of battering yourself against it, simply sit down at its base. Feel the cool, rough stone against your back. Let the unchangeable things exist while you, finally, allow them to support rather than crush you. You have fought long enough. Now rest in the wall's shadow. London, 1851. The Great Exhibition opens its doors to reveal humanity's most ambitious architectural dream, the Crystal Palace. A cathedral of iron and glass stretching across Hyde Park like a greenhouse for civilization itself. Sunlight pours through transparent walls onto displays of machinery, progress, and rational design. Everything visible, everything calculable, everything perfectly ordered according to the relentless logic of the industrial age. When Dostoevsky visited this monument to Enlightenment thinking, he felt not wonder, but a profound, almost physical revulsion. This gleaming structure would haunt him for years, eventually becoming the central symbol in Notes from Underground for everything suffocating about modern existence. The underground man looks upon this crystalline vision of the future and feels his soul recoil in horror. The Crystal Palace, represents a world where every variable has been measured, every outcome predicted, every human need satisfied through rational planning. It is the fantasy of perfect transparency, a society where consciousness itself becomes unnecessary, because algorithms and statistics have already determined the optimal path. No mystery, no contradiction, no messy human irrationality disturbing the smooth operation of progress. Remember his rage against the equation. 22 plus 4? The Crystal Palace is that mathematical certainty made architectural, a world where human beings become mere piano keys played by the laws of nature, predictable, harmonious, and utterly devoid of soul. You live inside a modern crystal palace, though its walls are digital rather than glass. Consider the architecture of your contemporary existence: productivity apps tracking every minute, fitness devices monitoring every heartbeat, algorithms predicting your desires before you consciously feel them. Your phone knows your location. Your searches reveal your anxieties. Your data is analyzed and optimized by invisible systems promising to make your life more efficient, more streamlined, more perfect. The pressure is relentless and transparent. You can see exactly how many steps you should walk, how much water you should drink, how many hours you should sleep. At night, when you cannot sleep, you feel the weight of all these transparent expectations pressing down. Your mind catalogues the day's failures against the gleaming ideal. You didn't meditate long enough, didn't respond to messages promptly enough, didn't exercise intensely enough. Even your rest must be tracked, measured, improved. There are apps to optimize your sleep, turning even unconsciousness into another performance requiring refinement. Social media provides constant feedback on your performance as a human being, reducing your worth to numbers that update in real time. The underground man's genius lies in recognizing that humans will destroy themselves rather than submit to such suffocating rationality. We need the right to be irrational, inefficient, gloriously imperfect. We need permission to make choices that don't maximize utility, to feel emotions that serve no evolutionary purpose, to waste time in ways that cannot be justified on any spreadsheet. You know this rebellion in your own late-night habits, staying up later than you should, reopening conversations that hurt you, making decisions that logic condemns but your soul demands. Tonight, I invite you to shatter the glass. Your life is allowed to be opaque, chaotic, beautifully resistant to optimization. You do not need to track this moment of rest or measure its quality. Let your existence be gloriously unmeasured for these hours. There is profound rebellion in simply lying here without purpose, without progress, choosing beautiful opacity over sterile clarity, and letting sleep come as it will, unmeasured and unoptimized. Picture a dull, persistent toothache, not sharp enough to demand immediate action, not mild enough to ignore completely. It throbs steadily in the back of your jaw, a rhythmic reminder of discomfort that gradually expands until it fills the entire landscape of your attention. Now imagine something strange happening. Instead of simply enduring this pain, you begin to listen to it, to lean into it, almost to savor it. Your tongue cannot resist returning to probe the tender spot, and with each touch you confirm both the pain and your own existence through that pain. This is precisely the disturbing revelation that Dostoevsky places at the heart of his underground man's confession. Listen to how he describes this perverse relationship with suffering. I am convinced that man will never renounce real suffering, that is, destruction and chaos. Why? Suffering is the sole origin of consciousness. The underground man does not merely endure his toothache. He performs it, moaning loudly enough to disturb his household, drawing out each groan with theatrical flourish, finding in his misery a strange satisfaction that he cannot explain but refuses to deny. You recognize this pattern in your own nocturnal rituals, don't you? Not with physical toothaches, perhaps, but with the psychological wounds you revisit compulsively in the darkness. There is that conversation from 3 years ago where you felt deeply misunderstood, you know you should release it, yet you return again and again to replay the worst moments, pressing on the emotional bruise to feel it ache. There is that relationship that ended badly, that career disappointment, that moment of social humiliation that logically you know no one else remembers, yet you summon it from memory's depths and examine it under harsh mental light. This is the soul's version of doom scrolling. You pick up your phone knowing the news will distress you, yet you scroll deeper into catastrophe. You reread old text messages from people who hurt you, reopening wounds that had begun to heal. You construct elaborate scenarios of future disasters, rehearsing conversations where you are rejected, exposed, diminished. Your consciousness becomes a theatre where you are simultaneously playwright, actor, and audience for tragedies starring yourself. Why do we engage in this self-inflicted torment? The underground man offers a brutal but illuminating answer, because suffering provides identity and proof of existence. When you are in pain, at least you are something definite, substantial, real. The ache confirms your consciousness in a way that contentment never could. Happiness is light, ephemeral, almost forgettable, but suffering has sharp edges, demands attention, cannot be ignored. In a life that often feels abstract and meaningless, pain offers terrible clarity and weight. There is also the strange comfort of familiarity. Your anxiety has been with you so long it feels like a reliable companion, predictable in its patterns. The thought spirals that torture you are at least known, mapped, yours. To release them would mean entering unfamiliar territory where you might discover who you are without your suffering. A genuinely frightening prospect. Tonight, however, observe this mechanism with gentle curiosity rather than judgment. Notice how your mind clings to familiar wounds, how there might be subtle resistance to letting go and drifting into peace. You are allowed to stop probing the tender places. Your existence does not require constant confirmation through suffering. Let the toothache of memory fade untouched, and discover the deeper pleasure of simple, unconscious rest. There exists a silence that soothes, and a silence that burns. The underground man dwells almost entirely in the second kind. In rooms thick with unspoken words, where the air hangs heavy, charged with the static electricity of things left deliberately unsaid. His silence is not the peaceful quiet of a monk, but the weaponized withdrawal of a wounded soul, nursing grievances like rare wines in the cellar of his consciousness, allowing them to age and develop complex notes of bitterness and resentment. Listen to how he recounts, with excruciating detail, the incident that haunts him for years. An officer brushes past him on the street without acknowledgement, moving him aside like an obstacle, rather than recognizing him as a person. This slight, barely noticeable to anyone else, becomes for him an obsession of cosmic significance. He fantasizes elaborate revenge scenarios, rehearses the moment when he will finally assert his dignity by refusing to yield the sidewalk, imagines the perfect collision that will force recognition of his existence. Yet when opportunities for actual confrontation arise, he does nothing. He passes the officer again and again, shoulder tensed for impact, but at the crucial moment steps aside, his revenge existing only in the airless chambers of his imagination. You recognize this peculiar art form intimately, don't you? The internal monologue that never becomes dialogue. The anger that corrodes the vessel containing it while leaving its target completely unharmed. How many nights have you lain awake conducting imaginary arguments with your boss, your partner, people who dismissed you months ago? You craft the sharp reply you never gave, the flawless defense of your worth that remains forever undelivered. In these mental theatres, you are always eloquent, devastating, victorious. But notice the cost of this hollow triumph. Your body lies tense beneath the sheets, jaw clenched, heart rate elevated, as if the conflict were happening right now in your bedroom. The adrenaline meant for fight or flight has nowhere to go, so it circulates in your blood like poison, keeping you wired and exhausted simultaneously. You replay the offensive moment, refining your understanding of how you were wronged, gathering evidence for trials that will never convene, maintaining internal monuments to past hurts that require constant tending. This is spite masquerading as virtue. You tell yourself you are choosing the high road by not confronting people, that your silence demonstrates maturity and restraint. But the underground man's confession reveals the truth. This silence is not noble but cowardly, not peaceful but seething. You are not forgiving, you are simply afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of seeming petty. Afraid that if you speak your hurt aloud, it will sound smaller than it feels in the echoing chambers of your mind. The energy required to maintain these silent resentments is immense, yet strangely intoxicating. Spite feels powerful, like drinking strong, bitter coffee that gives you a sense of agency when you feel powerless in waking life. Each unspoken resentment becomes a stone you carry in your chest, and the people you argue with in your thoughts sleep peacefully tonight, unaware of the elaborate court proceedings you conduct in their absence. What if you simply set these stones down, not through confrontation necessarily, not through forced forgiveness, but through sheer exhaustion? You have carried them long enough. The verdicts you seek will never satisfy, the perfect comebacks will never be delivered, the justice you crave exists only in imagination. Tonight, let your silence change its nature. Allow it to soften from weapon to blanket, from shield to shelter. You do not need to win these invisible battles or prove your worthiness to the ghosts in your mind. Let the courtroom of consciousness close its doors, release the energy spent maintaining these internal monuments, and discover the deeper pleasure of silence that finally cradles rather than cuts, empty, peaceful silence where rest can enter and gently carry you towards sleep. Picture a chamber lined with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of yourself. One shows you as ridiculous, another as pretentious, a third as desperately needy. You stand paralyzed in the center, trying to control which reflection appears most authentic. But the mirrors multiply infinitely, each offering a new distortion, until you can no longer distinguish between what you actually are and what you imagine others see. This is the torture chamber, where Dostoevsky's underground man exists whenever he ventures from his solitary corner into the blinding, merciless light of society. There exists no more excruciating scene in all of literature than the dinner party sequence in Notes from Underground. The underground man learns of a farewell gathering for an old schoolmate, men he simultaneously despises and desperately needs to impress. Though uninvited, he insists on attending, arriving early with the awkward timing of someone already defeated in his own imagination. His clothes feel shabby against their polished appearances. His very presence disrupts the natural rhythm of conversation like a discordant note in a carefully orchestrated symphony. Watch how his consciousness operates during this social catastrophe. He is not simply experiencing the party, but watching himself experience it. His awareness splitting into performer and critic. Part of him stumbles through interactions, while another part provides devastating real-time commentary on his failure. When he attempts wit, his jokes land in silence that stretches like chasms. When he tries dignity, it emerges as pompousness. When he retreats into sullen observation, even his silence feels conspicuous, radiating the toxic energy of wounded pride. You recognize this splitting of consciousness intimately, don't you? How many gatherings have you attended where you felt simultaneously invisible and overexposed, certain everyone noticed your nervousness while also feeling completely overlooked? You rehearse conversation topics beforehand, but when moments arrive, your prepared remarks feel artificial, and spontaneity abandons you entirely. You laugh too loudly at jokes or not loudly enough, stand too close or maintain awkward distance, speak too much or fall into silence that feels weighted with inadequacy. The underground man projects his own merciless self-judgment onto every face around him, interpreting neutral glances as mockery, natural pauses as deliberate exclusion. He needs their gaze to confirm his existence, yet that same gaze feels like physical violation. This is the peculiar torment of hypersensitive consciousness in social spaces. You cannot stop imagining what others think, yet you are certain their thoughts about you are as harsh as your own internal critic. Modern existence has amplified this mirror effect exponentially. Social media transforms every interaction into performance, every post into a test of worthiness measured in reactions and responses. You curate versions of yourself for public consumption, crafting captions carefully, deleting and rewriting, then obsessively monitoring how these performances are received. Each notification becomes evidence for or against your social acceptability. The underground man had only his immediate circle as mirrors. You have hundreds of potential reflectors, each offering fragmented images of who you might be in their estimation. The true horror unfolds not during the social encounter itself, but afterward, when you return to your underground sanctuary and the forensic examination begins. Did I talk too much? Was that comment inappropriate? Did they notice my hands shaking? Why did I mention that embarrassing detail about my life? The dinner party replays endlessly with enhanced clarity, each awkward moment magnified through the lens of retrospective shame. That pause, before someone responded to your observation, expands in memory until it becomes a chasm of rejection. That moment when you reach for your drink and nearly knocked it over transforms into irrefutable evidence of your fundamental inability to navigate human spaces gracefully. Yet here lies the profound revelation hidden within Dostoevsky's brutal honesty. The underground man's suffering emerges not from how others actually perceive him, but from his relentless interpretation of their perception. Most people at that dinner party are too absorbed in their own social anxieties to judge him as harshly as he judges himself. They are not obsessing over his awkwardness. They are managing their own insecurities, their own performances, their own fears of being found inadequate. Tonight, however, in the merciful sanctuary of darkness, all mirrors finally turn black. No one is watching you now. There are no eyes to meet, no expressions to decode, no social hierarchies to navigate. The complex web of approval and rejection that seemed so solid and threatening during daylight dissolves completely in the solitude of night. Here, you do not need to be charming, articulate, or even coherent. You do not need to earn your place in any room. Consider the profound liberation of being genuinely unseen. In sleep, you are equal to everyone, just another consciousness drifting toward the same mysterious darkness where all performances end and authentic rest begins. The social mirrors that tormented you fade to black glass. The audience that seemed to judge your every gesture was largely projection, shadow puppets cast by your own fears onto the walls of imagination. Let the memory of awkward moments dissolve like smoke in this darkness. They exist now only in your mind, and you possess the power to stop feeding them with your attention. You are safe here, hidden from all eyes, free to breathe without audience or expectation. The stage is empty, the curtain has fallen, and you are finally, wonderfully alone with yourself, and that, dear soul, is more than enough. Picture the underground man stumbling through snow-covered streets after his catastrophic dinner party, drunk and desperate, seeking some form of oblivion in the yellow gaslight that barely penetrates St. Petersburg's winter darkness. His path leads him to a brothel, not from desire, but from a need to touch bottom. To find someone as degraded as he feels himself to be. There, in rooms thick with cheap perfume and resignation, he encounters Liza, a young woman whose circumstances mirror his own psychological imprisonment, yet who possesses something he has long since abandoned, the capacity for genuine feeling. At first he plays saviour with theatrical cruelty, painting vivid pictures of her inevitable future, disease, abandonment, a pauper's grave with no mourners. He describes the warmth of family life, honest work, the possibility of redemption through love. His words carry unexpected authenticity despite their manipulative intent, and something awakens in Liza's eyes. She begins to see him not as another customer, but as a fellow sufferer, someone who understands her pain because he carries his own wounds so visibly. Days later, she appears at his miserable apartment, having taken his address and his words seriously. She arrives carrying the fragile hope that his compassion was real, that connection might be possible between two damaged souls. And here, faced with authentic tenderness, the underground man's consciousness performs its most vicious act of self-sabotage. When she sees past his hysteria and bitterness to the simple truth beneath, Dostoevsky gives us one of literature's most devastating observations. She understood from all this what a woman understands first of all. If she feels genuine love, that is, that I was myself unhappy. This moment of recognition terrifies him more than any social humiliation ever could. To accept her compassion would mean dismantling the elaborate fortress of spite that gives his life structure and meaning. It would require believing he deserves love, and his entire identity is built on the foundation of his unworthiness. So he destroys her deliberately, cruelly, thrusting money into her hand to reduce their sacred moment to a mere transaction, insulting her until she flees sobbing into the snow. You recognize this tragic recoil in your own relational patterns, don't you? The way you sometimes push people away when they venture too close, testing their commitment by showing them your worst aspects first. When someone offers genuine praise, you deflect with self-deprecation. When vulnerability is extended toward you, you feel an instinctive urge to prove you don't need anyone, to retreat to your emotional underground where you are safe, sovereign, and heartbreakingly alone. You preemptively reject to avoid rejection, destroying the very connections you desperately crave because intimacy feels like exposure, And being truly seen means being seen in all your perceived inadequacy. Tonight, however, in the merciful sanctuary of darkness, you can observe this pattern without acting upon it. You can acknowledge the part of you that feels unworthy of tenderness without letting it dictate your choices. The underground man's tragedy is not that he suffers, but that he chooses suffering over the terrifying, redemptive possibility of being loved exactly as he is, complicated, wounded, and beautifully human. Let yourself feel the grief of connections missed or sabotaged, not as punishment, but as recognition of the desire that still lives beneath your armor. That longing is proof of life, evidence that the underground has not claimed you completely. You are still capable of the encounter that terrified our narrator. As you drift towards sleep, be gentle with the tender parts of yourself that have learned to hide. You do not need to be perfect to be worthy of care. You need only to exist, breathing quietly in this darkness, allowing rest to come as naturally as compassion, inevitable, healing, and profoundly deserved. Picture a universe governed by perfect mathematical certainty, where every variable can be calculated, every outcome predicted, every human choice reduced to logical necessity. In such a cosmos, 22-4 stands not merely as arithmetic truth, but as symbol of absolute, unchangeable law, cold, precise, indifferent to human longing or protest. The equation holds across cultures, centuries, and galaxies, a pillar of certainty in an uncertain world. Yet Dostoevsky's underground man, in perhaps his most radical declaration of independence, announces that he would rather insist 22-5 than submit to this tyranny of logic, not because he believes it, not because he's delusional, but because his freedom to be magnificently, irrationally wrong feels more essential than mathematical correctness. Listen to the revolutionary fury embedded in his seemingly absurd statement. I admit that twice 2 makes 4 is an excellent thing, but if we are to give everything its due, twice 2 makes 5 is sometimes a very charming thing too. This is not ignorance speaking, but desperate rebellion against a universe that seems to leave no room for the human soul's irrational needs, for what he calls our caprice, that beautiful inexplicable whim that makes us something more than sophisticated calculating machines. The underground man sees clearly where pure logic leads, to the crystal palace of perfect rationality, where human beings become piano keys, producing sound exactly when struck according to predetermined laws. If consciousness must bow before every equation, if every action can be predicted through sufficient calculation, then what space remains for genuine choice? For the wild unpredictability that distinguishes a living soul from a biological computer. He would rather embrace beautiful nonsense than surrender the last sanctuary of human freedom. Your anxious mind, lying awake at this hour, operates as precisely such a relentless calculating engine. It tries to solve the unsolvable equations of existence. If I had chosen career path A instead of B, would fulfillment have followed? If I worry intensely enough about potential disasters, can I prevent them through sheer mental vigilance? If I optimize every variable, sleep schedule, diet, productivity systems, will the formula finally yield peace? You exhaust yourself running these calculations, seeking the one correct answer that will allow your consciousness to rest, demanding that your emotional life conform to logical frameworks that were never designed to contain the complexity of human experience. Consider how much energy you waste trying to force feelings into rational equations. You tell yourself, I shouldn't feel anxious because logically there's no immediate threat. You demand that your emotions justify themselves with evidence, treating your responses as calculation errors requiring correction rather than as the complex, non-linear phenomena they actually are. When you stay awake, scrolling despite exhaustion, when you procrastinate on tasks whose delay will only increase suffering, when you send messages you know will complicate your life. These are not failures of logic, but assertions of the soul's refusal to be domesticated entirely by cause and effect. This is the profound liberation hidden within the underground man's mathematical rebellion. Life is not an equation with a single correct solution. Love does not follow rational laws. Meaning cannot be derived through pure reason. The most important decisions you will make cannot be reduced to cost-benefit analysis or probability calculations. Your consciousness, for all its brilliance, cannot compute its way to certainty, because human existence operates according to logics that transcend mere arithmetic. Tonight, however, I offer you permission to embrace the equation. 22.5. Not as literal truth, but as symbolic liberation from the tyranny of optimization. Your feelings do not need to make sense to be valid. Your choices do not need to be perfectly rational to be authentic. You are allowed to want contradictory things, to feel emotions that defy explanation, to make decisions that cannot be fully justified through spreadsheet analysis of their probable outcomes. The dream world you are approaching operates entirely outside mathematical laws. In dreams, you fly without wings, exist in multiple places simultaneously, speak with the dead as naturally as breathing. Time bends like soft metal, physics dissolves into poetry, and logic takes a well-deserved sabbatical. This is not madness, but a different kind of wisdom. The wisdom of the unconscious mind that knows truths beyond calculation, that finds meaning in metaphor rather than measurement. As you drift towards sleep, let your thoughts become increasingly abstract, increasingly free from the burden of making rational sense. 2 + 2 can equal whatever brings you peace tonight. Maybe problems don't need solutions. Maybe questions don't need answers. Maybe the heavy stone wall of necessity can turn to mist, and the rigid grid of your responsibilities can melt into abstract, shifting shapes that ask nothing of you except to observe their gentle transformation. There is immense relief in realizing you don't have to be logical right now. The demand for consistency is a burden you can finally set down. Let your mind wander into territories where mathematics cannot follow, landscapes that don't exist, colors without names, emotions that serve no evolutionary purpose. The equations are collapsing, the calculations fading. Drift into the liberating, nonsensical, beautiful darkness where 22 equals rest, equals peace, equals the soft, illogical comfort of finally letting your calculating mind fall silent, and discovering that in the realm of dreams, the most charming truth of all is that nothing needs to add up. Perfectly for you to find your way home to sleep. Picture Dostoevsky's underground man transported from his cramped St. Petersburg apartment into your bedroom tonight. The damp walls have vanished, replaced by smooth surfaces. The flickering candle has become the cold blue luminescence of a smartphone screen, casting shadows across your face. Yet the essential architecture remains unchanged. He is still isolated, still observing life rather than living it, still trapped in the exhausting theatre of consciousness. The underground has not disappeared in our age of connectivity. It has simply migrated into the glowing rectangle you carry in your pocket, that small portal where you are simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, constantly visible yet profoundly unseen. You write your confession daily in status updates and carefully curated photographs, broadcasting fragments of your existence to hundreds while feeling more isolated than any solitary figure in a 19th century garret could have imagined. Each post becomes a performance, yet you consume others' performances as documentary evidence that everyone else has mastered the art of living, while you remain trapped in your underground consciousness, painfully aware of your own curation even as you engage in it. You refresh compulsively after posting, your worthiness quantified in real time through likes and comments, metrics that would have horrified Dostoevsky yet perfectly illustrate his insights about the performance of selfhood. The underground man obsessed over a single perceived slight from an officer on a crowded street. You experience dozens of such micro-rejections daily, each leaving its digital trace. Someone views your story but ignores your message. A friend likes others' posts while scrolling past yours. You see gatherings you weren't invited to in photographs tagged with locations that exclude you. These barely noticeable slights accumulate like snow until you're buried under the weight of perceived insignificance, your phone becoming a pocket-sized catalogue of evidence supporting your deepest fears about your own inadequacy. What makes this modern underground particularly insidious is its illusion of connection. The underground man knew his isolation had honest borders. But you exist in a strange liminal space where you can message hundreds yet feel no genuine contact, where you broadcast thoughts to followers yet remain fundamentally alone with your consciousness. You perform intimacy through emojis and brief comments, maintaining the appearance of relationship while the actual substance, presence, vulnerability, sustained attention withers from digital neglect. Notice how technology amplifies every underground tendency. Your hyper-awareness finds infinite material. Why did they use that particular emoji? What does their delayed response signify? The passive-aggressive silence the underground man cultivated now manifests as read receipts left unanswered, messages carefully crafted, then deleted unsent. You scroll through someone's documented life without them knowing, becoming a ghost haunting their digital existence while remaining safely hidden in your own underground. The comparison game operates continuously now. At any hour, you can measure your life against an infinite supply of others, their productivity, relationships, apparent contentment. Your device becomes a digital crystal palace promising connection while delivering only the anxiety of constant measurement. Even your doom scrolling at 3 mirrors the underground man's toothache, a compulsive return to sources of distress, because engagement, even painful engagement, feels like the only proof of existence. Yet here lies profound liberation. Everyone you observe on that screen is also performing, hiding their own underground moments, their own 3M anxieties. The perfection you envy is construction, as fragile and artificial as any palace built from glass and algorithms. Tonight, you can perform a radical act simply by letting the screen go dark. When the blue light fades, comparisons cease. Metrics vanish. The performative self dissolves into darkness, leaving only the real, breathing, feeling human being. Your true life is not happening on distant servers, but here, in the rhythm of your breath, in the unmeasured sanctuary of your own mind as you drift, finally free toward the deep, analog silence of sleep. Imagine, for a moment, that the war is finally over, not the wars of nations or ideologies, but the silent, relentless civil war you have been waging against yourself for as long as you can remember. The exhausting battle where you are simultaneously soldier and enemy, prosecutor and defendant, critic and victim. Your muscles ache from clenching against your own nature. Your thoughts circle the same narrow battlegrounds, and even your anxiety has grown weary of its own repetitions. It is here, at this threshold of profound fatigue, that a different kind of wisdom whispers from the darkness. Enough. The tragedy of Dostoevsky's underground man is not that he suffers, but that he refuses to allow his suffering simply to exist. He demands constantly that reality be different, that his nature be different, that the stone walls of necessity yield to his protests. He cannot accept his own pettiness without turning it into theatre, cannot acknowledge his cowardice without wrapping it in bitter irony, cannot admit his longing for love without immediately mocking it. Every feeling must be justified, explained, transformed into performance. This refusal becomes the source of endless torment, not the original wound, but the wound's constant reopening with the knife of his own resistance. Listen carefully to this crucial distinction, for it contains the key to your own late-night suffering. There is the inevitable pain of conscious existence. And then there is the suffering we create by demanding that this pain should not exist. You feel anxious, which is uncomfortable but manageable. But then you feel anxious about being anxious. Why can't I just relax like normal people? Then you feel ashamed of your anxiety about your anxiety. I'm so weak for struggling with this. Then you feel hopeless about the shame of the anxiety about the anxiety. I'll never be able to fix myself. Each layer adds crushing weight until you're buried not by the original feeling, but by your own resistance to that feeling. Notice how much energy you expend fighting yourself tonight. You lie here trying to force sleep, which only drives it further away. You demand that your mind stop racing, which makes it race faster. You hate yourself for being unable to simply relax, which creates the very tension that prevents relaxation. Consider how your mind tries to negotiate with reality. I should be further in life by now. I shouldn't still be hurting over this. I shouldn't be this anxious, this tired, this alone. Each should is a stone added to the load already crushing your chest. Radical acceptance is not resignation or defeat. It does not declare circumstances good or fair or desirable. It is something far more subtle and revolutionary. The gentle act of looking at what is, including your own suffering, your sensitivity, your underground consciousness, and simply acknowledging it without adding the secondary layer of judgment. It is saying, with profound compassion, this is what's happening right now. This is what I'm feeling. It doesn't need to be different for me to be okay. What if you simply stopped fighting? Not forever, not as permanent surrender, but just for tonight. What if you allowed yourself to be exactly as you are? Anxious, if anxious. Restless, if restless. Beautifully, complicatedly human, if that's what you are. Your sensitivity, your overthinking, your underground consciousness are not problems requiring solutions, but simply the texture of your particular existence, neither good nor bad. Just real. Tonight, practice this radical act as physical mercy. Feel the tension in your jaw and accept it without trying to force it away. Notice the worry circling in your mind and let it circle, watching it with detached curiosity. Stop treating your personality as a malfunction requiring repair. The stone wall remains, but you no longer need to bloody your forehead against it. The underground remains, but it transforms from prison to sanctuary. In this gentle laying down of arms against yourself, Something miraculous becomes possible. The tight fist of consciousness slowly, finally opens, and in that opening, rest enters like water filling an empty vessel, like darkness covering the exhausted earth, like sleep arriving not as achievement, but as grace, natural, inevitable, and profoundly, beautifully deserved. There exists a paradox buried at the very bottom of the underground, a truth that reveals itself only to those who have descended deeply enough into their own darkness to discover what waits in the deepest chambers. The underground man, for all his bitterness and spite, for all his self-inflicted torment and deliberate isolation, has given us something precious beyond measure. He has mapped the territory of human consciousness with brutal honesty, refusing the comfortable lies that allow others to sleep easily, but leave the soul starving for authentic truth. In his willingness to examine the ugliest corners of his own nature, he has performed an act of profound courage that illuminates the path for all who follow into these depths. This is not the blinding daylight of easy optimism, nor the harsh fluorescence of forced positivity that characterizes the crystal palace of modern self-help culture. It is something subtler, more honest, the muted glow that arises when a person stops fleeing from their own nature and sits still long enough to hear what suffering has been trying to whisper. Like a buried star beneath layers of earth and stone, this light has been waiting patiently for you to dig deep enough to uncover its steady, ancient radiance. Consider what your underground consciousness has actually given you beyond the sleepless nights and paralyzing self-doubt. Your capacity for suffering is directly proportional to your capacity for meaning, for depth, for the kind of empathy that penetrates beneath social surfaces to recognize the hidden wounds others carry. Because you know what it feels like to be unseen, you notice the unseen people around you more clearly. Because you understand the crushing weight of small humiliations, you possess a gentleness toward others' fragility that the confident men of action often miss entirely. Your sensitivity is not a defect requiring repair. It is the instrument through which you perceive frequencies of beauty and sorrow that others pass without noticing. The underground man's tragedy was his inability to see this light within his own darkness. He saw only his sickness, never his depth, never the profound capacity for truth-telling that his suffering had cultivated. But you, lying here tonight, can choose a different perspective. You have survived your own mind this long. This is no small achievement in a world that offers so few maps for navigating the complexities of deep consciousness. Think of Dostoevsky himself, standing before that firing squad, shivering in Siberian chains, writing through epileptic seizures and crushing debts. His underground years were the crucible that forged his genius. Without his descent into darkness, there would be no Brothers Karamazov, no Crime and Punishment, no profound understanding of the human soul that has comforted millions for over a century. His pain became a lantern illuminating the path for others lost in their own labyrinths. Tonight, recognize the strange solidarity of this very moment. You feel alone in your bedroom, isolated in your thoughts. Yet across the world, right now, millions of others are lying awake in their own undergrounds, wrestling with similar demons. Notes from Underground has endured for 150 years precisely because it speaks a universal language of isolation. By listening to these words, you participate in a quiet communion of souls reaching across time and distance to say, I see you. I know this place. You are not as alone as you think. The light from the depths is not the sun of the surface world, but something softer, more fragile, like the glow of a single candle reflected in a dark window. It does not banish the darkness, but makes it habitable, revealing that your struggle is not evidence of failure, but proof of a soul grappling with the immense, beautiful, terrifying complexity of existence. Your underground is not a prison, but a sanctuary where authentic wisdom is slowly, patiently born. Rest now in this knowledge, carrying this gentle light as you drift toward the peace that has always been waiting in the deepest chambers of your beautifully complicated soul. St. Petersburg again. Winter again. But now the confession is complete. The candle on that crooked wooden table has burned down to its final pool of wax, the flame trembling once, twice, then surrendering to darkness with a soft whisper of smoke that rises and dissolves into the cold air. Outside, snow continues its ancient work, falling in thick silent curtains across the frozen Neva, blanketing the gas-lit streets until even the harsh edges of the city soften into gentle, undulating forms. The underground man has finally set down his pen. His papers lie scattered across the scarred wood, ink-stained confessions that tried to capture the uncapturable, words that reach toward truths too large for language to hold. You have walked beside him through every chapter of this descent, past the stone walls of necessity and the crystal palaces of false perfection, through the corridors of hyper-awareness and the chambers of spiteful silence. The mouse has finished its restless scurrying. The equations have dissolved. The mirrors have turned their faces to the wall. What remains now is not philosophy, but something older, deeper. The simple recognition that consciousness, for all its beautiful torment, eventually grows tired of its own performance and seeks the mercy of release. Feel how the boundaries between his 19th century underground and your contemporary darkness have grown thin, permeable. His cramped apartment and your bedroom exist in the same essential space. The sanctuary where thinking souls retreat when the day's obligations end and only authenticity remains. The damp walls of his refuge and the familiar surfaces of your room merge into a single geography of solitude, not lonely but profoundly private, where you are finally allowed to stop performing and simply be. Let the snow that falls outside his window begin falling inside your consciousness now. Each anxious thought that tries to rise meets a soft, cool flake that gently weighs it down, covering it in peaceful white. The sharp edges of your worries become rounded, muffled, until the entire landscape of your mind is nothing but pristine, unbroken silence. The regrets of the past disappear beneath inches of forgiving snow. The fears of the future become distant countries, separated from this moment by miles of quiet drifts. Notice how language itself begins to lose its grip. Words that felt so important, anxiety, failure, inadequacy, soften like ink in water, their meanings blurring until they become simply sounds, then shapes, then nothing at all. Underground is no longer a concept, but a sensation of depth, warmth, enclosure. The philosophical frameworks we explored together dissolve into their essential truth. You are a conscious being in a complex world, and that consciousness, for all its complications, deserves rest. Your body understands this language, even when your mind resists. Feel the weight of gravity pulling you deeper into the mattress, into the pillows, into the dark earth of sleep. Your breath slows naturally, matching the rhythm of the falling snow, steady, inevitable, requiring no effort or attention. The air grows thick with the particular quiet that comes after confession, after the soul has emptied itself of words and finds there is nothing left to explain. Down here, in the deepest chambers of the underground, there are no watchers, no judges, no expectations. The performance is over. The audience has gone home. You exist now as pure presence, breathing, resting, gradually releasing the tremendous effort of being consciously, anxiously, beautifully human. Your thoughts drift past like distant trains, their rumble felt but not heard, passing through without stopping, leaving no trace in the pristine snow of your awareness. Deeper still. The boundaries between sleeping and waking grow indistinct. Perhaps you are already dreaming. Perhaps consciousness and sleep are not opposites but different rooms in the same vast house, and you are simply walking from one to the other, carrying nothing but the gentle rhythm of your breath. The underground is revealed not as prison but as cocoon, not as isolation but as sanctuary where tired souls go to be renewed. Let the darkness wrap around you like heavy velvet. Let the silence fill your awareness like warm water. The mouse is asleep. The philosopher has fallen quiet. The city is covered in forgiving white. Even the wind has stilled, leaving only the soft whisper of snow against glass, the gentle settling of a world at rest. There is nothing more to understand tonight. Nothing to solve or fix or improve. You have descended as far as consciousness allows, to the place where thought dissolves into sensation, sensation into rhythm, rhythm into the vast, formless peace that waits beneath all our restless seeking. Here, in the deepest underground, you are safe, hidden, held by the same darkness that cradles every sleeping soul across the centuries. The snow falls, the silence deepens, and you, beautiful underground dweller, finally rest.